Hello, and thank you for inviting me to speak on behalf of AgriHQ and the wider forestry industry. My name is Friel, and in my role as a data analyst at AgriHQ, I contribute to reports focused on the primary industry markets, including forestry. AgriHQ is a highly reputable source of independent market insights and commentary on the primary industries. It has access to a wealth of up-to-date market data, including China CFR rates, NZ wharfgate prices, and the domestic log market. Our forestry data is collected on a monthly basis via a log survey, which we circulate throughout the New Zealand forestry companies that supply the national and international market. This provides us with a snapshot of the monthly market, which analysts then use to inform their commentary, along with industry insights and independent research. AgriHQ is owned by Global HQ, which also publishes the Farmers Weekly newspaper, which is sent to every farmer in New Zealand on a weekly basis. Forestry market data is collated and presented to subscribers in three useful, comprehensive monthly resources: the AgriHQ Forestry Market Report, the AgriHQ Log Price Indicator, and the AgriHQ Log Price Report. Attendees of this conference can receive a complimentary copy of November's reports. For further market insights and outlooks, I highly recommend you make use of this deal. Forestry is an established primary industry in New Zealand and contributes 1.6% to the GDP, earning $6.7 billion annually. Following European settlement in New Zealand, native forest was cleared at an exponential rate to make way for urban settlements and farmland. This was so aggressive and rapid that by the 1920s, some native species were at risk of extinction. To manage this risk and limit pressure on New Zealand's native forests, incentives were put in place to encourage the planting of exotic species. Today, New Zealand has 10.1 million hectares of forest, of which 1.8 million hectares are productive plantations. Net deforestation since 1990 means New Zealand's forestry resources have reduced by 27,000 hectares since the year 2000. Government programs such as the 1 billion tree program and the emission trading scheme have incentivised further planting, and in 2019 there were 22,000 new productive plantings. 90% of New Zealand's productive forests are planted in NZ pine, or Pinus radiata, a softwood species native to California that performs well in the New Zealand climate and soil conditions. The remainder of productive forests consist of Douglas fir and eucalyptus, as well as other minor species. Due to NZ pine being the major species of wood produced in New Zealand, it is the focus of this presentation. NZ pine forests produce uniform, high-quality logs for the domestic and export market. This is achieved through rigorous tree breeding methods, consistent pruning and thinning out of unwanted branches, and allowing a large proportion of trees to grow to the notation age of 30 years. Based on MPI data, we know the average NZ pine tree is harvested at 28 years of age. The typical tree grown in these conditions is 35 metres tall and has a harvest volume of 2.5 cubic metres. The basic wood density of a mature NZ pine is variant, but averages between 400 to 420 kgs per cubic metre when cut. The average total recoverable volume of an NZ pine plantation yields 466 cubic metres per hectare. On average, New Zealand domestically processes 40% of the roundwood logs harvested nationally. The products produced domestically in New Zealand are sawn timber, paper, paperboard, panel products, and wood pulp. Sawn timber is produced in the greatest volume. In the first 2 quarters of 2020, 1.7 million cubic metres were produced. If it weren't for the COVID-19 lockdowns disrupting log harvesting and mill operations, it is likely there would be a greater volume of sawn timber produced this year, as in the same period last year, 2.1 million cubic metres were produced. There has been a significant reduction in the number of sawmills operating in New Zealand. However, greater automation and higher profit margins have driven an increase in mill efficiency and led to an increase in annual outputs. For example, 4.3 million cubic metres of sawnwood was produced domestically in 2019. This is an increase of 23% from the 3.59 million cubic metres produced in 2009. However, when compared to the amount of logs harvested, this is a small proportion, as domestically small proportion domestically manufactured, as 37 million cubic metres of roundwood was harvested in 2019. Due to the low core wood content of New Zealand pine, the species is considered a sapwood. Like all sapwood, NZ pine has a high moisture content of 60 to 200%. This is calculated by dividing the weight of the wood type's water content by the oven dry weight of the wood. The high water content of sapwoods, like NZ pine, and the available supply of simple nutrients provides an excellent substrate for fungal growth and makes NZ pine vulnerable to parasitic attacks. NZ pine is at less risk than rubblewood, but more risk than Douglas fir. Using an anti-sap stain chemical is imperative to protecting NZ pine from fungi and other parasites. To be used in conjunction with an anti-sap stain, kiln drying is the recommended drying method for NZ pine. NZ pine is one of the easiest species of wood to dry due to it being a sapwood variety. Sapwood is highly permeable and dries very quickly. When done properly and stored in the right conditions, it will be stable for its end use. Using a conventional kiln at 70 to 80 degrees Celsius and an airflow of 3.0 metres per second, average drying time for NZ pine wood is 5 days. There are a variety of log grades NZ pine produces. These grades are standardised to be as uniform as possible and have a variety of end uses and values. Export grade logs and unpruned A grade logs trade for a higher value, while J, K and pulp logs trade for lesser value. A and J logs were initially intended for Japan exports, while K logs were intended for Korea. Now the log export market is more open and importers such as China, India, the US and Australia are in the market, and log grades are not predestined for certain destinations. Due to the New Zealand Forestry Company's strong attention to detail and diligence around uniform silviculture practices, there is a variety of lumber gradings NZ pine can be produced for a number of different purposes. These are appearance grades, cutting grades, structural/framing grades and industrial grades. Appearance graded wood can be used for finishing and furniture and is wood which is either clear of knots or contains minor blemishes and small knots. Within the appearance grade, there is a subgrade known as clear lumber, which is free of knots and blemishes and is used for high quality furniture, joinings and mouldings. As NZ pine is light coloured, medium dense, soft wood with an even texture, it is very adaptable for a number of appearance based uses. Cutting grades are produced by repurposing timber into shorter, clear lengths of wood. These grades contain large knots and blemishes, which are removed by cross-cutting and ripping the wood. The final products are often used for mouldings and furniture. Structural grades, also known as framing grades, are used primarily in construction for products which require strength and stiffness. The main decider of whether wood can be classed as structural is based on the size and location of knots. Industrial grades are used for packaging for products such as pallets, cable drums and concrete formwork. Wood for these grades can have a variety of sizes and types of knots depending on end use. Now it goes without saying that 2020 has brought a number of challenges and disruptions that the NZ forestry industry did not see coming. Usual market patterns and stability were guiding the industry until mid-January, when COVID-19 was earnestly and severely impacting China's economy and society. In the lead up to the Chinese New Year, CFR prices into China dropped. This was done to offset the low productivity at mills in China as well as the low workforce that would be available to the ports. Domestic port inventories climbed as they normally do in the Chinese New Year period, but this was then sustained when exponential growth in COVID-19 case rates led to the Chinese government extending the holiday period and announcing a national lockdown. By the end of January, New Zealand log exporters were feeling positive about the situation. This was supported by low shipping costs, leading to an optimistic outlook for the year. However, money did come out of the wharfgate prices in January as the price for all exported pruned logs dropped by $4 per JAS cubic metre. By February, COVID-19 was being viewed with more seriousness in New Zealand, and New Zealanders were being urged to stay home when sick and large-scale events were under pressure. The forestry industry was one of the first affected professions in New Zealand. Logging crews were stood down around the country as exporters operated at reduced capacity due to diminished demand from China and other importing countries. Depending on the contract some crews were operating on, and New Zealand's government had not yet announced a lockdown and wage subsidies, some industry professionals were left in very precarious employment positions. At this time, the New Zealand log market was very fluid, and CFR prices were hard to settle on due to the low volume of logs being exported. All unpruned logs dropped in value by $16 to $18 per jas cubic metre while China was shut down, as there were few outside markets for them. Indeed, as COVID-19 began to take hold in India and Korea, finding an alternate destination for New Zealand's softwood was a very difficult task. In March, the New Zealand government declared its own lockdown, and any logging crews that were still operating had to leave the job, along with all other New Zealanders. By this time, China had a greater control over their own outbreak, and more people were back at work, which gave them the opportunity to clear pile-up of logs. At this time, the New Zealand log market was very fluid, and CFR prices were hard to settle on due to the low volume of logs being exported. All unpruned logs dropped in value by $16 to $18 per jas cubic metre while China was shut down, and there were few outside markets for them. Indeed, as COVID-19 began to take hold in India and Korea, finding an alternate destination for New Zealand's softwood was a difficult task. In March, the New Zealand government declared its own lockdown, and any logging crews that were still operating had to leave the job, along with all other New Zealanders. By this time, China had greater control over their own outbreak. More people were back at work in China, and there was an opportunity to clear the pile-up of logs at the Chinese ports. Prices were recovering, and shipping costs to the country continued to drop, allowing for more wharf activity and higher wharf gate prices. However, New Zealand was not in a position to capitalise on this situation, as local mills could not operate at a profitable capacity. Logs were at the risk of deteriorating if they were left fouled for too long before being processed. A-grade logs saw a price increase as activity and interest from China lifted, and in April, A-grade logs went from a 5-year low in prices to an all-time high. New Zealand domestic demand for timber picked up in April, which further bolstered the price of our wood outputs. China's situation continued to improve, and as their construction sector went back to work on key projects due to increased government spending, there was a wide range of log prices being quoted at the wharf gate. For the period of February to April, export volumes were down 42% on last year's levels. Midway through the year, the market was rapidly changing. While A-grade prices strengthened, pruned logs were slower to recover. Shipping costs dropped concurrently with the price of oil. Shipping costs to China eased each month, and by May, they were priced at $17 per jas cubic metre, the cheapest it had been in 4 years' time. China's GDP contracted 6.8% in the first quarter of 2020, the first quarterly contraction for the country since 1992. This influenced a 30% decline in demand for NZ wood from Chinese mills. In June, local construction was down as building projects were deferred or cancelled because of COVID-19. There was a low incentive to supply the local market, as better prices were on offer in international markets such as China. By July, there was finally some settling in the forestry market space after a very disrupted 15 months. CFR prices were back on June, but rising exchange rates and a slight increase in shipping costs exacerbated a decrease in wharfgate profits. Reduced harvesting in winter aligned with reduced demand from China, as hot weather limited production and building, as is the norm for this time of year. Prices have largely contracted by a decrease in demand, and all prices were back $15 to $20 per jas cubic metre. August felt more stability in the market, but prices were not strong. Pruned logs were favouring buyers, and there was little price movement in this area. The NZU, which is New Zealand's carbon credit unit, was faring very well and at an all-time high at $34.15 per NZU, which didn't motivate owners to fell plantations, as trees were making more standing and did not provide any costs. By September, forestry had stabilised well, given how other industries were faring. Preliminary roundwood removals signalled a large drop-off in NZ harvesting. Total log removals were the lowest since March 2017. A small lift in wharfgate prices occurred, and this was attributed to by improving CFR rates in China. At last count, the NZ log export market appeared to be showing further improvement. The national average wharfgate price for A-grade logs has seen an increase of $4 per JAS cubic metre. A steady New Zealand dollar exchange rate of 1 to 0.66 USD is providing a stable market, and the fact that it has not lifted recently isn't doing harm to export prices. China's swift recovery from COVID-19 has provided a reliable export destination for New Zealand logs, and hopefully this will maintain stability in the market. Thank you for your time and your attention. It has been a pleasure presenting today. And may I reiterate that if you would like to know further market insights from AgriHQ, do take advantage of the deal we have offered today.